And we're back to another episode of the Zealous Podcast. I'm your host, Rocky Snyder. This week, I get to kick back with Justin Lovett. And Justin is the head strength and conditioning coach for the Los Angeles Rams. That's right, Super Bowl champs this past year. We're going to find out a whole bunch of things, from his times as a high school strength coach and PE teacher through his days at Western Kentucky and Purdue, Denver Broncos, and then somewhere along the way he ended with the Rams and he's got himself a Super Bowl champion ring. We're going to find out his secret sauce and what the ingredients are to make a championship team. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. Enjoy the show. Justin, thanks for being on. I'm tickled pink. I love football through and through, and I've got a lot of respect for the Rams and you being the head strength coach there. I want to know all the ins and outs, but before we even get underway with Rams, I would love to know your superhero origin story, right? How did you get to be there? Because I know you've traveled in the college ranks and you did high school coaching. What got you to where you are right now?
I think I started off as a high school strength conditioning coach and a PE teacher. Worked a little bit privately, got a degree at Colorado State with exercise science and was all set to be a high school football coach, and a strength and conditioning coach just kind of came to me because I had the exercise science background. So I started privately with Billy Glisson, who is a exercise physiologist out of Fort Collins. And he kind of showed me the ropes, and I got to work privately for a year to cut my teeth and how to coach, how to progress, how to use exercise science within the boundaries of energy systems and biomechanics. And I found that to be a blessing. So when I did get to be a high school coach, maybe the goal, the end game to be a high school football coach, went away because I had such a science background. And really the only reason I got hired at a high school level was for the science background. So they said, you're not coaching football or baseball, none of those things that you maybe have wanted to. You're going to be working with our athletes and keeping these guys from going to velocity or going to acceleration or going to another private facility like the one that I just came from. And that was pretty unique. So I started there, and I ended up teaching and coaching for 4 years at a school right outside of Denver. And my wife was a health teacher and a PE teacher and special ed as well. And so we had no plans or interest in coaching college or professional ball. It just happened that in 2004, my first year, 2008, we won a state championship at a 5A level, which was pretty cool. And we had in football and made some noise in volleyball and basketball as well, which was, that school is 10 years old. And it was pretty unique to be I got to work with all the athletes and those myself and some coaches. And it was pretty humbling experience. I loved every minute of it. And so we thought that maybe there'd be an interest. We had a former a coach by the name of Steve Sewell, who was a first round draft pick in '84 for the Broncos. His son was on our team and worked with us as a position coach. And I said, hey, Steve, I'm already tenured here. I don't need a job. I'm not trying to get to the NFL. I just want to learn what's best for my kids to bring it back. I mean, we just had a house built in Aurora. Like, my wife's a teacher here. We have no interest, bro. Just see if Rich Tootin, was a legend, pretty intimidating one in the strength conditioning industry, and still is, as a matter of fact, intimidating. I mean, but just see if I can get in there and just, I'll set up, take down. I won't say a word to these guys. And one thing led to another, and that got me in the door with Denver for their 2008 off season. So at the time it was 14 weeks, and I didn't say anything to Rich. I set up his drills, took him down, cleaned up the equipment. And if he left some workouts, around, I would take him and try to reverse engineer and figure out why he did that. I didn't want to ask him. I had no business even being in the same floor with him, but he was, I was a big learn by watching and try to reverse engineer and figure it all out on my own. And then I could ask some educated questions about why he was doing what he did. And at that time, he'd already won 2 world championships with Denver as their head strength coach. And he had spent time at University of Florida twice and North Carolina and had tremendous success. So that was my origin story. And once I got in there, really caught, the competition and the, took over, in the sense that, like, you could really mail it in as a high school coach, unfortunately, and run what you did in 1991, and it's still relevant in 2004, or you could really put yourself out on the line, and your results are published in newspapers, wins and losses, rush yards, fourth quarter comebacks, even though there's obviously heavy tactical components that comprise those statistics. I did enjoy the thrill of, the potential of, if you can't scheme and put your athletes in a best position to be available, and they're not available for your games, then you're probably not good enough to be up here, and you should go find something else to do, and somebody's going to come for your neck. And I found that adrenaline of that piece of the business was alluring. It's cutthroat. It's the top of the food chain. And if you're not chasing somebody at the top, somebody's chasing you. And if you're not careful, you'll get ran down. So I found that part of the job appealing, and being super competitive with how we have the lowest rate of hamstring, or we only had 2 ACLs, or, oh my gosh, we had 8 ACLs. What are we doing wrong? We have to, recalibrate and reinvent our systems to make it more optimal and better, a better experience for the players. So that kind of started it. And then once I got to Denver, it was I went to UTEP for a year, from volunteer in Denver to be an assistant at UTEP, which was great under Mike Price, and Kirk Davis was the head strength coach. And then Mac Shanahan, there was a move in Denver, and they asked me to come back. Rich Tootin asked me to come back as an intern. And so I took it. And I was a little older at the time, but I took it, and I saw that every other strength coach had a volunteer and intern stint somewhere on their resume. And so I thought it was great. I just loved Denver and the organization and how they treated their players and their people. And so it was a no-brainer to me just to learn from Rich one more year. And that turned into 2 full-time years after that. So with Josh McDaniels and John Fox. So I was fortunate to really experience 3 different head coaches, their styles, their systems, their schemes, and how it impacted our strength conditioning, our field philosophies with how we worked speed, acceleration, top end speed, change of direction. I mean, everything was impacted by the scheme of the system and the players that they brought in. So I was really fortunate. Even though there was some staffing turnover, I really enjoyed, and I wouldn't trade any of that uncertainty, because that ultimately pays dividends each year that I'm with the Rams, or each year that I'm in this business, because you do have a different team each year. You do have different skill sets that you have to adhere to from a programming point of view. So I that origin story is pretty fun to reflect on for me, and my wife as well.
Yeah, I mean, boy, talk about, you mentioned the word fortunate, and I gotta just reiterate that. It's beginning with the high school faculty being so forward-minded or progressive to actually want a strength and conditioning coach for their sports, because that is not, I would love it to say that it's a commonplace, but these days it still isn't. You hear about these positions opening up at different high schools, but it's usually the sport coach who is the strength coach. And of course, they're relying on what they were told when they were playing. And yeah, so we're talking about somewhat effective but archaic information filtering down from one student to the next. But to actually have a place where you can hone your skills with young athletes. In fact, I was speaking to a guest of mine a couple of weeks ago, Jacob Buffa, who's with the Houston Astros. He's the director of performance science over there. And we were just commenting on how young the players are coming into the major leagues right now. And he attributes a lot of that to proper strength conditioning at the high school levels. Mm-hmm. So what, just out of curiosity, what would you say to that with the NFL? I know it's a different beast entirely, football and baseball. We won't get into the ins and outs of it, but could you see that by having a earlier, I'll say, intervention of strength conditioning at a high school level that's very effective, that we would start to see younger rookies in the NFL?
I don't know if it would be younger rookies. I would say that their training age is a little bit more advanced, at least now compared to 10 years ago. And I would say that the high school experience provides us such a broad spectrum to work with. If it's an 8th grader that really is coming into high school for the first time and he doesn't want to play football, he just wants to be able to beat up his older brother, cool. Then he wants to you have to tailor your strength conditioning to fit whatever that kid is a group of kids want, and based on their expertise, their training age, and whatever attributes they have. And then you have the high end Division I prospect that really doesn't want to hear or interact with you because they have a private coach, or they have maybe their college strength coach that they're going to this university has given them a blueprint of success, and they just want to do that, and they're already past you. So how do you relate to those guys? Just that broad spectrum really suits what we see now, which is you get a kid from a FCS that really maybe they have racks, obviously, but they're more functional in their approach just based on the environment that they live in. Or, you have very dominant weight room kids that maybe lack a little bit of functional, farm kid type of athleticism because they are so pattern ingrained in the weight room, and they came from these giant Power Fives. That spectrum is very vast, and so I could agree with what the Houston Astros sports science department sees, in the sense that that spectrum, the training age might be a little bit more advanced, but you still see a vast spectrum, and the kids that don't have it, they still don't have it. And while those kids are probably fewer and far between, it's still that gap still exists, and it's pretty cavernous in some respects.
Well, it's interesting you bring up training age and just the difference over the course of 10 years. And in that time too, the way in which you design programs has changed and really evolved considerably, in my imagination at least. I mean, we were so heavy into the strength component, that is the panacea for all that ails an athlete. Just let's throw some weights around. But these days, there's so many more elements. Your role has become more complex, would you say?
Absolutely. I think back in those days, I've always been sort of a mixed method approach type of strength coach. Just that gives me an out to maybe have more functional or more platform twitch if I wanted to install that in whatever programming that we had. It gives me a license to go traditional with max strength programming, or triphasic when we include some of our power derivatives. It just gives me license to do whatever is needed for the roster at the time, and not be bound by some kind of guidelines that I set for myself if I'm a high intensity strength coach. Well, there's high intensity elements in what we do. There's Olympic elements in what we do. There's functional elements in what we do. And we never want to be labeled as, oh, you're functional. That means no weights. Oh, you're Olympic. That means heavy weights. That doesn't really translate to football. So it gives me a license, license to do whatever we need to do for the roster. So in that respect, those tenets, if you will, haven't changed for me. However, the emphasis points, as you allude to, have definitely changed, where maybe there's much stronger, more consistent emphasis on strength. Strength cures everything. Feed the dysfunction. There was obviously a heavier emphasis back then than there is now. You still touch it, obviously, but how strong is strong enough, especially at this level? You get guys, if you weren't strong enough, well, you wouldn't have got drafted. So that is removed. It's no longer providing strength reports to guarantee your existence for future seasons of this guy came in squatting whatever. Now he squats at this level. I mean, he's either available or he's not. He's either efficient as a mover or he's not. And so some of those pathways with how you get stronger have changed, and what goes around your strength and conditioning has changed. Tendon health, tendon resiliency, programming, interventions based on asymmetries. I mean, those things weren't around. Correctives weren't really heavy on the agenda back then. And now with the resources of sports medicine blending together with sports science to help and aid strength conditioning, now those resources are available to us, and we are versed in those resources to say, this guy's he's programmed on the offensive mids, or let's say it's the offensive line, which is a little bit more eccentric and isometric. And this guy's programmed for a defensive mids, which is more concentric flavor and more smash and grab alpha male. Well, obviously that dictates a little bit of what their asymmetries might include, whether it's from collisions, whether it's from being use dominant of a single leg to kick. So I think those robust systems of intervention strategies to make your offensive mid, defensive mid, offensive line programming more targeted, more bucketed, and not to mention force velocity bucketing. So you take your global program. This is what I do for the offensive line. Well, you have vectors of this guy needs this asymmetry. These guys need a little bit more mobility based on subjective or assessment testing from the training room. Great, he's on a different vector. This guy's 10 years in and he's got no knees, so he needs this. And so now within an offensive line, and not even talking about developmental or return to play, that's 6 different vectors within an offensive line program that you have that makes it individual. And let alone now you have defensive line, you have offensive mids, defensive mids, specialist quarterbacks, rookies, offensive skill, defensive skill. And you have to do all that in a way that isn't just empty routines. It's systems of training. So each of those systems have their own path of how you get those athletes to a better spot. And sometimes it's more global, more similar in nature, pattern derivatives. And in the other sense, it's much more specific and athlete focused, based on the how you build, how our administration and leadership team has built our room. So it's different. Definitely, the emphasis has changed, but it's still based in strength and power. But obviously, those metrics don't mean anything if they're not available.
So you've got 64 individual programs set up, which are somewhat biased positionally based on the player, but nonetheless, we're not just talking the linemen are coming in and this is what they're all doing. Receivers and corners, this is what they're doing. You're looking at every individual and tweaking their programs based on objective and subjective assessments and what you really are trying to get out of them.
I would say we have the capacity to do that. However, those groups, we bucket them. And so based on need, and usually there's within 10 to 12 groups, and there's a couple one-offs, maybe 6 to 10 one-offs of return to play, significant. I can't actually load this guy, this guy's got a labrum that we're going to fix at the end of the season. So he doesn't, his pressing is modified. So within those global assignments, there's these vectors that ping off and are individualized. I would say that they're bucketed. They're subgroups, subcategories that have even more subcategories. Maybe some guys have the same assessment interventions, but one's right leg and one left leg. So they're in the same bucket. It's just this guy has to work on his right, this guy has to work on his left, and having a coordinated, organized system to pull that off, I believe is of high level importance. Because if we didn't have a robust staff of sports science, keyed in sports medicine, and under a performance umbrella, we couldn't pull that off. It'd just be, you would revert to what you can control, which is everybody does the same thing because now I can see clean lines. Well, we have 5 bodies in the weight room at one time with myself and 3 full-time strength coaches and a strength conditioning fellow. So we do have the manpower and the resources to pull it off, to be intentional with how we program, to be effective with how we program. And whatever we just said about vectors and asymmetries, we have to audit all of that. Otherwise, it's empty. It's we're doing these correctives, but we're never going to measure the results of our implementation strategy. So the player's like, man, I just spent all this time doing a left leg, working my eccentric capacity, my left leg. You've made a big deal about this test, but I never retested. How do you know it's better? Oh, because it looks better. That's never an answer. Now the answer is you can see it's better, or you can see it's not better, which is now I got to fix it. And to be transparent in communication with our players, I think that's, you alluded to some secret sauce. I think that's the secret sauce of, we'll put it on paper and we'll put ourselves under the microscope. Your scores are in the paper. if you lose on Monday night 35-3, well, so is ours. If I can run a program and I say this is a max strength phase, and our position group, our interior offensive line, they don't get stronger. Well, it's not a max strength phase. It's something else. And I got to wear those L's just like the players have to wear those L's on Sunday if things don't go right. So I think that's our secret sauce in terms of being transparent in our communication style and keeping it ongoing and not just hiding the numbers when they don't go our way.
Gotcha. Now, this system that you speak of, this that you've developed, I imagine there's several agents, representatives, players, whatever you want to call them, these professionals along with you that are putting together the system. This is not just you putting together this massive kind of spreadsheet, if you will. I mean, how does a system like that develop?
It comes from Reggie Scott, our director of performance. He's really, when I got to the Rams, even during the interview process, I would field calls from a couple of people around the league that I've worked with, or in college football that had heard that I was going to interview with the Rams. They said, look, be careful. These guys operate in 2040, even though it's 2020. Just make sure that that's where you want to go. Very innovative, not afraid to try new things and fail, try new things and be on the front edge of the tip of the spear, if you will. And so it comes from Reggie Scott and having clear roles and responsibilities of how we collaborate, the guidelines that are established, what our programming DNA is supposed to exist, and how our departments interact with sports science and where our arting systems tie in from a sports science component. So it's really, I found that they have a system for the most part with how to collaborate and communicate. When we rolled in with our strength conditioning principles and methods, it was a fit. They hired based on people and the fit, and our what I like to do fit with what they have been doing several years. And there's a reason that that the Rams are in the top 3 in terms of least amount of injuries each year from practices missed and games missed. And so I knew that going in, and I wanted to be a part of it. It just so happened that our identities and our wants and needs from a strength conditioning perspective were in more alignment than I could have imagined. So it was just it was a great fit. And so it's really a credit to Reggie Scott and what he's been doing the last 10 years, 12 years.
Wow. So there's 2 things that I would love to talk about. One is, you mentioned earlier, tendon resiliency. And I would love to know how you go about improving or enhancing or reinforcing that, as well as mitigating the likelihood of non-contact injuries. I mean, we're talking high hamstring pulls and ACLs are probably the top buckets right there. How do you do that?
The John Hernandez is one of our PTs and the athletic trainers, and he's responsible for our force deck testing, our images when we're jump testing our players, and our interventions. And part of the interventions that come with maybe concentric or eccentric emphasis or amortization emphasis goes along the lines of improving and bucketing those specific players and what they need. So that's a granular approach. John also developed our Tendon resiliency program, which is a much more global approach throughout the roster that we've taken at in addition to tendon health, shoulder health, or core activation, where you have standardized exercises, sets and reps prescriptions that you can install globally throughout all of your programs in an effort to audit at the end of the year. Do these work? Are our numbers lower than they were last year? What's the mechanism of injuries compared to last year? Is it contact, non-contact? So we do, if we have a twitch block or a strength block, there would be some isometric holds. There would be some pulses. Maybe it's some Berlin method that we have yet to jump into or progress to from a bent knee standpoint, a straight leg standpoint, but just attacking and that I think that originated for all of us during COVID. because everybody was not trained at that point. So the big worry when the roster came back was we're going to get hamstrings. We're going to get guys ripping their Achilles. We're going to get all these things. And to be honest with you, firsthand, in 2011, that was my last year in Denver. That was the lockout year. So we did see that and across the board, and it was high. And so that resonated with me. And to have a proactive approach, it became COVID, caused, but it's become part of our DNA where we don't come off it now. Even we're doing some of these things in season. Not that you can prevent everything, but you can do your due diligence and sleep well at night because you've at least touched some of these, and our players are engaged. They understand why we're doing it. So that's how the tendon resiliency program came about, and we're really happy with it. And that's bled over to some shoulder health initiatives, some mobility initiatives that are global, but can be individualized based on your position. So we think that it fits with how you build your program as well within your blocks. If it's a twitch block or a strength block or an auxiliary block, I mean, our coaches, when we write programs, it's not cookie cutter. So it has to, I think another secret sauce or element of our program that works is each program has to have some efficiency to it, has to have an emphasis of build them up instead of break them down. The players have to feel better when they leave compared to when they show up. It's not, I remember in a while back, you were mandated to, they better be on the ground by the time you're done with them. And that's when the coaches are going to know that they did enough work. And that's when your players are going to feel like they got their money's worth from you. And now maybe that's the case at other places. Here, we're trying to build them up, and they can feel they're putting on armor. They're adding selective armor, smart targeted armor, not just traps and chest. They're adding infrastructure to their movement capacity, as well as improving specified movement attributes. And so our players, when they leave, we hope that they feel better when they came in. We hope that they feel like we targeted how they are, what they are as an athlete, and because our goals are the same. We don't really care what they look like in the mirror, but guess what? That's a component of, everybody looks in the mirror after, so that has to be a component of how you program. So we try to make sure that we're attacking multiple facets, not just tendon health or strength or power or armor per se, but we're attacking everything from a player or a position specific standpoint. And if it's not there, we want to have an open line of communication for those guys to say, look, I used to do a lot of grip work. I used to do a lot of functional core work on my feet and not a lot of core work where my feet are off the ground. How do I add that? And our response is, whatever you've gotten or done to get yourself to this point, it's not invalid now that you're in the NFL. It's something that if we like it and you like it, well, let's put it into your program. And if it's really substantive, then guess what? The next thing that you'll see is that type of programming throughout the entire offensive line or wide receiver room. And, so we have that mindset as well, to be open and innovative. And our players, if you got the right group, they'll write your program for you. Our offensive line, they're great at that. A lot of knees over toes work. They feel that ankle mobility is something that they've worked on over COVID with their private work that they did. And it's something that we keep. Number 99 for our team is something that, and I don't mind saying this, sometimes with our bar velocity programming, he'll look around and it's like, none of y'all need that bar velocity. Those numbers don't matter. And I tell him, like, it doesn't matter for you because you're a mutant, but it does matter for these guys. Let's we can play ball, but their program has a different DNA to it. And sorry, my dog's barking in the bathroom. A little bit of attention. But yeah, so it's so that part we enjoy certainly about the programming nature of what we're doing. But the tendon health is definitely part of our DNA.
That's fabulous. And I'm just hoping there's a whole bunch of high school coaches that are listening to what you said about building them up and not tearing them down, because that's an archaic way of thinking of, we just want all the players to be just completely heaps of heavy breathing, just masses or blobs on the field at the end of the conditioning program. It's just not the way to go. So that's really encouraging. So of course we got to talk about the elephant in the room here. We got to talk about the Super Bowl. And not that you guys were unlikely by any stretch. I mean, you guys, there was a little bit of struggling through the midseason. Then you got some gel going, and then of course, you guys took off and you're like fireworks. So what was that like? I mean, I don't see a ring. Your hands are below the camera, but I know you got to have a championship ring. How was that?
The championship ring is coming in July 21st. I think there's a ceremony coming, so we're all pretty excited. But the process was, all credit goes to obviously Sean McVay and how he's structured our organization. It's a we not me approach, and it's all about the process. So even during our darkest moments where maybe we didn't win a game in October, the entire month of October struggled with some injuries, and Von Miller alluded to it in some of his media engagements, where the Rams, he said the Rams didn't change, the practice schedule didn't change. It was just adhere to the process. We believed in the process. It wasn't a doubling down of double the practice time, extra lifts, or anything like that, more conditioning. It was just trust the process. And I think there was a level of comfort throughout the roster and with our, speaking of our staff, of just, let's weather the storm, and everybody has faith in the process, and there's tweaks and adjustments that everybody's going to make, and more attention to detail. But that's singular focus, that week to week, day to day, hour to hour mentality is something that resonated with us. So there was a calmness I felt throughout the season, and you really didn't reflect on it until at the end of the year, that each playoff game was a single possession, a last, end of the game possession. And that, I don't think I'd want to write that script again. I'd prefer the blowouts, so you can have some calmness in the fourth quarter versus the anxiety. But I think that process really helped us, just day to day, week to week, even hour to hour. What's our intent? Why are we here? All right. What's the focus? What's the main objective? Don't overthink it. And we took that mantra in the weight room as well. And we weren't scared. We programmed to how we always did. We didn't. There's a tendency. There can be there can be a willingness to go gun shy and pull back, because what if this happens? What if that happens? And why are you loading this guy in the right before the NFC Championship at 88%? Why are you doing that? And there's what we talked about was, you're not going to lose. You're not going to win a Super Bowl or a playoff game based on one workout, but you darn sure could lose one. So you have to obviously have the courage of your convictions. But it has to be measured with the gravity and the nature of the situation that these players are competing against. But we weren't playing with scared money, and that's a testament to how Sean McVay lays out our organizational structure, and it's a testament to the players with the trust that we have in them and the trust that they have in us. And if I were to pull back, and in some instances we were smarter, as opposed to reckless, and our players would be like, what's this? Why aren't we doing this? Oh, we always do this. And then, they might blow through a stop sign and say, look, I've done this every week since I've got here, and you're trying to jack up the bar speed minimums so I hit less weight. Is that what you're trying to do? No, thank you. And, so we played ball with what got them here, and it came full circle. So we definitely appreciate the journey, and still kind of, it still hadn't sunk in, as funny as that sounds. There hasn't really been too much time to, believe that it happened. You just move on to the next one, and maybe there'll be some time over these next couple of weeks where you can relax and take a deep breath before you go try to get another one.
Yeah, because you don't have too many weeks before you have to take a breath and get into it. Okay, here's one area that I don't often bring up, but I'm curious. The kicker, field goal kicker, place kicker, not punter so much, but we can throw in the punter. this role has become much more pivotal, I would say, over the last 20 years, whereas field goals were within the 35-yard range, maybe 40 or so. But now we're seeing 50 to 60-yard field goals. What's going on with the conditioning of the kickers? Has that part of it, has that changed? Or is the scouting just much more of a sniper bullet where they know exactly the type of individual they need for these power players? Because kickers are one of the leading scorers of the team. So what's up with that?
Maybe, it comes to what you said earlier with the robust nature of, foundational strength conditioning that a lot of American football players get earlier on in their high school careers than what they did. So what we're finding and what I'm seeing is multi-sport athletes, guys that have, some of our specialists. They're not one-trick ponies. They're some of the best athletes that you have on the team, and that maybe wasn't the case 10 years ago. I would stack, Riley Dixon or Matt Gay or Johnny Hecker from last year, or Matt Orzich, with some of the our long snapper with some of the strongest and in certain strongest in well, with Matt in the weight room. I mean, I said, wow, when I first met him, I said, what, the linebackers lift later today. What are you doing here? He's like, nah, I snap, dude. And I was like, whoa, I've never seen one like you. And just, long snapper like you, just rocked up, and a weight room guy. And these other guys are multi-sport athletes. They can throw, they're threats to run. They're threats to do a lot of different things. And they weren't one-trick ponies. Usually the kicker wasn't able to throw. And these guys are running fakes in practice and putting the ball on throwing it on a dime 40 yards downfield. And it's like, wow, the athleticism of those specialists that have really have taken off in the last 10 years is probably attributed to what you said earlier, just more strength conditioning, foundational work as young athletes, and obviously playing multiple sports when they come up. And so it's pretty cool. And so as far as our specialists and strength conditioning training, we lean into that. They have their own programs and rotational power development. Some guys come up working with linebackers, and so they want a little bit of linebacker DNA in their strength conditioning, but that's measured and tailored to when they kick, how often they kick, and what their needs based off an assessment are. So we lean into it. We love our and usually the last 3 years I've been involved. And even in Denver with Matt Prater and Britton Colquitt and Lonnie Pax, those guys are engaged. They're way more engaged with how their body works and what they need than initial reports would suggest. I certainly didn't anticipate that kickers and punters and long snappers would be so engaged in detail about how they move, how their core is engaged throughout movement. Are they sequenced properly? Long-winded way of saying that a lot has changed, and in professionals, they just continue to stay engaged.
Well, and you bring up the multi-sport athletes. I mean, I understand that you even incorporated multi-sport conditioning into your programs. I don't know if it was with the Rams, but prior to that, you brought in MMA as a means of training your players. How did that work out?
It's an interesting story. I was a amateur boxer. When I was in my 20s, I thought I wanted to play, football and baseball at a high level. And I played in college, just a little bit of football and baseball at a small school, and didn't work out well for me for a number of different reasons, but I still had the competitive itch. So I played some semi-pro football when I was at Colorado State. I wasn't good enough to make the Colorado State team or walk on. And they didn't have a baseball team. So I was like, man, I want to be a high school coach. I want to learn the game at a different. So I played some semi-pro football and still competitive. I got into some amateur boxing and trained, and my coach was a professional boxer. And so that kind of started off. That got me, when I got to Denver, that boxing, same hand, same foot concept matches really closely with offensive linemen, what they do. And then understanding that the needs of conditioning those players has to be a little bit more joint preservation focused. So how can I get their heart rate to spike without, ragging their knees and their ankles out, because they're 300-yard they're the 300-pound guys. They don't need to be doing 300-yard shuttles. So that kind of started in Denver with just the boxing. Players loved it because that was the biggest challenge for me from football to boxing. You think you're in shape, but you're not. You don't know how to breathe. You don't know how to stay composed during high stress. And if you listen to NFL films, what I picked up on, the guy that grunts, well, he's the guy that ain't breathing. The guy that talks and yeah. I mean, he's breathing the whole time. So just understanding that, you hear sounds when they get off the line of scrimmage of who's breathing, who's holding their breath. It doesn't make them any more or less effective in what they're trying to do, but in between plays, rallying and catching their breath and being able to be on the field for more than 1, 2 snaps, 3 snaps, 4 snaps in a row, that does have an impact. And it comes from breathing through boxing. And long story short, when I go to Georgia, after our time in Denver was done, Joe Tereshinski was a third generation Bulldog. He took over the weight room after several years of being in the weight room and running video and a bunch of different capacities in Georgia. I had a little spot on my resume. I thought I was coming in the NFL, this and that. And he's like, yeah, that's cool, but tell me about this boxing thing. I said, well, I wasn't a very good amateur boxer. You can see by my nose, but I won a couple and I lost a couple. But here's how it affected my approach to how we program for linemen or how we program for linebackers, especially from a conditioning standpoint. And he loved it. And he took me over to Mark Richt's house. And then the next thing I know, I was employed by the University of Georgia. And they said, and Joe said, look, you're going to put we want this room to be dedicated to 21 heavy bags and Muay Thai bags. And we want some MMA stuff. And I said, Joe, I think you misunderstood. I didn't do no MMA. I've never wrestled. I don't understand leverage. I wasn't a lineman. I mean, look at me. He says, that's okay. But, Tennessee's doing some MMA. They got a cage in their weight room. I said, all right. And he says, in Alabama, their strength coach, they're teaching their players how to do arm bars. And I was like, Joe, okay. I mean, I'll do whatever. You're a chameleon in this business. I'll figure it out. And so that was at the time the 5-man rule had started changing some things. You could only have 5 strength conditioning coaches on the floor. You could employ outside help and gurus. And, Teddy Atlas used to do boxing with the Jets and used to do boxing with the Browns. And then at Georgia, the Singer brothers had a gym. They were UFC fighters or affiliated with UFC. And they had a gym in Athens, and they used to come over. And one of their strength coaches was a hybrid MMA and strength coach. And so I jumped in there. I said, look, guys, I'm not trying to fight. I just want to take whatever I can to facilitate back to Bulldog football. And those guys took care of me like I was from Athens. I mean, they loved me up and choked me out and tapped me out for, everybody in that class probably did it for the first 2 or 3 months. And I had no offensive maneuvers at all, but I would just take things from the warm up, how you spend the first 20 minutes on the ground from a strength endurance standpoint, a functional knees over toes. You got to look, you can do 315 on a bench, however many times, but can you do 20 push-ups? Probably. If you can't, I mean, that's very common. I mean, you can squat 500 pounds, but can you do reverse lunges? There's some very distinctive qualities of MMA, wrestling, boxing warm-ups that are not translated in a traditional sense of the weight room guy, the weight room kid. They can push a lot of weight, but the strength endurance capacity it sometimes is missing. And so I found that changed how I like to program to put different angles in the body under different stresses after whatever power and strength gains has been achieved or the stressors we have already moved through that portion. And so it created a more robust athlete and a more robust system as far as we were concerned. And so I loved it. And that's how that started. And it was really guys taking care of me. I was asked to do something that was probably outside my comfort zone and finding ways to design or learn programs and design them in a way that's engageable, fun, and effective for the athletes. And that carried over a little bit to Purdue. We called that, we turned that into pass rush school, and we had, maybe 12 heavy bags, and it was just an alternate form to do conditioning. It was fun for players, how to learn how to throw punches and kicks and the metabolic of getting them up and put them on the ground to side control or mount. I mean, it was just a foreign concept to these kids, and they loved it. And it was just something that it's not even, it can be relatable to football, but to them, it was like, oh, this is an obstacle course of violence. I mean, I could throw some forms. Yeah, this is how they do it on TV. And we didn't take ourselves too seriously. I mean, and they loved it. And part of what you learn in this business, if you lean into what they love, they're going to love you back. And so if our programming consists all about hurdles and run rockets and heavy squats, well, that's what everybody else is in America doing. If we get feedback from our players that like, look, I like some of that pass rush stuff that you're doing. I like some of the hand combat that you're doing. Well, guess what? We're going to do it. And I think that's, maybe a third aspect of our secret sauce is leaning into what the players like and what they want. And even if they don't need it, but they want it and they like it, you should probably find a way to slide it in there.
I love it, Coach. I love it. And you've got quite a few ingredients making up that secret sauce for sure. And one that you alluded to earlier was the Rams are in 2040. And my question there is, you also mentioned that you've got people that are right at your heels, and you're looking at the other direction too. So it's one of those things that keeps you jazzed. It's always being on your game, always being on top. What is it that you're looking at to stay in 2040 right now? Where do you get your information? Where are you going? I know fascia training's out there. We've got force plate technology, velocity-based training, all that, right? It's already there, but what else? What are you looking at?
In addition to some of the fascial stuff that you mentioned with Dr. Barr, a lot of the stuff with Brian Mann and Cal Dietz, for our schematics, maybe our getting outside the box and looking at, organizational philosophies from books from David Epstein, Range. We got into a book of reading that. Charles, I forget if I pronounce his name, Duhigg, The Habit. Obviously John Gordon is a pretty strong influence for our head coach and our organization. So some of those leadership philosophies, how to make the best choices for your organization, your staff, and your players. So outside of the box resources for me are some of those books. Jim Collins, Good to Great, has been a great big time influence on our organization as well with our GM. So leaning into some of these things from an organizational standpoint that help refine our approach, so it's same voice, same message. So and I always it's always fun to find how close that organizational strategies can apply to your weight room, and it's really not a stretch for some of those principles to cross over. And we just talked about Range of the multi-directional athlete versus the athlete that's been a kicker since he was 7. The multi-directional or the multi-faceted approach is you're finding two ways to do business: the Tiger Woods approach, or somebody that the game a little bit later, like some of these other football athletes that come from different sports, basketball, and they end up having 15-year careers in football. Even though, one guy for us was George Fant, that is a starter for the New York Jets. He was a 5th year. His basketball jersey at Western Kentucky was hung in the rafters, and he came to us, learned football. And how I described him at once when a reporter asked was like a big, tall first grader. He doesn't know anything about football, and he fires off late on the ball because the cadence is different for him, and he's not exactly heavy or violent with his hands, but he didn't need to be. He was learning the game at his pace and his and what suits him. And next thing you know, with that body type, the explosiveness that he had, and the versatility that he had from being a dominant basketball player, he's still playing the NFL and playing at a very high level, and he's picked it up. And so I think that those kind of concepts from having a broader range that David Epstein talks about are very relative. And so that's kind of where I'm searching for my stuff.
Right on. And I guess this is what you're doing on your little semi-vacation right now when I imagine this is kind of you're gearing up toward the season, but this must be a little bit of time for reflection and kind of resetting for you. Is that right, this time of year?
Yeah, a little bit. We were able to have some good professional development opportunities with our staff, which was great. We had Stu McMillan from Altus come in and talk to us. Jonas Dodu out of the UK was able to Zoom with us as well, and just having some different to get away from whatever your schematics are and your programming responsibilities are. And it's similar to the way that you do as a college coach when you get out and you go to conferences. You just leave your preconceived notions and what your programming constraints are at the door, and you just you go into talks open-minded, and you learn from others, and maybe you learn what not to do from others. And so that's what this time is about. So it's really just kind of setting some things down, reflecting a little bit, and reviewing and auditing yourself. And we do that as a staff. We audit our wins and losses internally, and we share those with our players. But once that's all said and done, until we start training camp right now, this is kind of a nice way to get away from it and get into some other thoughts and ideas that you could draw on later on for next season.
Well, I wish you a great next season. I can't thank you enough for taking a little bit of your downtime for us to have this conversation, because, boy, you poured a whole bunch of information in the course of 45, 50 minutes or whatever. And it's something that I'm just going to listen to probably about 2 more times for all that to sink back in. And I still won't get it all. But this has been great. I really appreciate it. And yeah, I mean, you know the team that I typically root for, but when it comes to the NFC, you guys are in there. You're in the mix. So I
appreciate that. And maybe on when you show this, you can blur out those 2 footballs in the background. Those 2. Yeah.
Sorry, brother. That's just not going to happen. But right. I could put a little, a little icon up here somewhere where we can have the Rams Super Bowl football just floating by or something. That would be good.
There you go. That's great.
All right. This has been great. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Well, that's it for another episode of the Zealous Podcast. I want to thank Justin for coming on, as well as just thank you to the Los Angeles Rams organization for just allowing this opportunity to occur. And make sure you tune in every Monday, 6 a.m. on the West Coast, 9 a.m. on the East, for another episode of the Zealous Podcast, where we get guys like Justin and others, including women professional coaches, dietitians, nutritionists, physical therapists, all the like, coming on and talking about what it's like to be a pro behind the pros. Until next week, take care.